Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're just about to begin, but before we begin, just want to give you a couple logistical things. If you do have questions during our presentation, please throw them in the chat. We do have folks monitoring the chat, and they'll inform our presenter when we have questions. We do also have closed captioning enabled for those who need it. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see something that says C in like a box that says CC show captions. You can click on the button and it will enable closed captioning for you. We will be sending out links afterward. So for folks who are missing the live presentation, you'll be able to see those later. But with that, I'm going to send it over to Elena and Green Tukwila.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Raccoons and Wildlife Rehab. This is one of our workshops in our Wildlife Wednesday series. My name is Alina Perry. I'm with Green Tukwila. I work for Tukwila Parks and Recreation, and I have the honor of running the Green Tukwila program. That's anything from restoration, education, dock to spot stewards. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please reach out to me. I'll be sending an email after this with a recording of this and the links, as Leah just said. And I'm just thrilled to be partnering with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Habitat at Home program for this series. Next month, I'm going to plug you before we even start, but next month, we are doing great blue herons and their habitats on March 1st with Chris Anderson. So make sure, I'll be sending a link when I send the recap to sign up for that one. It'll be in person and virtual. And I want to do a couple other updates. Green Tukwila has got 2 restoration work parties in February, part of our Love Your Local Park series. We've got some planting and some invasive plant removal. We'd love to have you join us. All tools and training are provided and everyone is welcome. I'll send links about that as well. And with that, I think it's time to turn it over to Nikki with the Habitat at Home program. And just, it's great to see all of these names of people I know. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person and listening to this talk.
Thanks, Elena. I'm Nikki Destels. I'm the Habitat at Home coordinator for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We are co-hosting this series with Elena, trying to get some fun environmental species education into different areas around the state. And today we're going to have a great talk with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's Rehabilitation and Falconry Program Manager, Jen Mannas. So here is Raccoons and Wildlife Rehab. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. Not nice to meet you. I don't see you, but it's good to be here. I'm happy you want or have some interest in raccoons. I saw a question in the chat came up about rabies, and I'm actually going to talk about that. So let me just share my screen here and we'll get going. Okay. So like Nikki said, I manage the wildlife rehab and falconry programs for the state. And what that means is I have 350 or so permittees that I oversee. I do inspections, I do renewals and permitting and make sure they stay in compliance and lots of different projects and things. So that's where my main day-to-day life is. I've been with the department a little bit over a year, about a year and a half, but I'm excited to talk about raccoons and rehab. I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into some natural history and biology about raccoons, talk about why sometimes we come into conflict with them in our urban environments, why they are sometimes a conflict for us is because they're so smart, things like that. And then, and as a result of that, what happens when raccoons are injured or sick. And then we'll go kind of jump into rehab and talk about that. So, raccoons are, they're a native mammal to the United States with a fossil record dating back to 2.5 million years ago. And they're distantly related to bears. There's 3 species commonly known as raccoons. And that raccoon that's native to North America is the common raccoon. So they call it the common raccoon to distinguish it from the other 3 main species. So you can see here, this is a map of their year-round range. And you can see that they are basically from Canada all the way down, almost all the way to South America, are our little ring-tailed friends that we have in our area here in Washington. There's a couple places in the US where they don't exist in the kind of deserty areas, but other than that, they're here. So raccoons, our common raccoons, they measure about 3 feet long, which includes their 12-inch bushy ringtail. Because their hind legs are actually longer than their front legs, they have this kind of hunched appearance when they walk, which is kind of demonstrated here in this little graphic comparing their size to ours. Adult raccoons can weigh anywhere from 15 to 40 pounds. So they're about the size of a small dog or a large cat. Their weight, of course, is determined by their genetics, their age, available food, their habitat location. There has been males weighing in at over 60 pounds, but that's very atypical. A raccoon in the wild will probably weigh a lot less than one in the urban area, just because urbanized raccoons have learned to live on handouts and pet foods and garbage and canned leftovers, things like that we leave out. So each of the front forepaws, front feet of raccoons, they have 5 dexterous toes. So this is what their footprints look like. You may have seen them in the snow or the mud, or even maybe on your tracks on your car or something. You can see they look kind of similar to our hands and feet, but their toes on their forepaws, because they're dexterous, it allows them to grasp and manipulate food and other items. And something to keep in mind about their paws, you can see here, it's holding on to a little treat. I think this is a captive raccoon, but their forepaws are almost like a second set of eyes. They will often rub and roll objects in their hands, and this will even sometimes rub their hands together when they're not holding any items. So keep that in mind. I'll touch back on that again later, but they do use their forepaws or their front hands as another set of eyes when they're exploring everything. So raccoon mothers will have between 2 and 5 babies, or kits. Baby raccoons are called kits, a year. At about 8 weeks old, the young usually leave the den and follow their mom around to new locations. They do move their kits around quite a bit. Even when they're not able to walk, they'll carry them, pick them up by their mouth, and they'll carry them to a new den site just to keep predators away. At about 12 weeks old, the young are weaned, and then they disperse in the fall or early winter, typically when there's plentiful food available. Sometimes they may stay with their mom until the following spring, but typically that fall time is when they're kind of reaching out and going out on their own. Some characteristics about raccoons I wanted to point out is that they're naturally curious. They get used to living in urban environments and around us. So they're can be easily habituated, which means they're not afraid of people, which could be dangerous. Then they're really good at solving puzzles, right? They can open up padlocks and all kinds of crazy things. So because of their natural curiosity, it makes them really, really good puzzle solvers, which is really high. It's hard for us to outsmart them sometimes. They're generalists, which means they can live in a variety of habitats and eat a variety of different types of foods. And they're opportunistic, which means they exploit whatever resources are available to them, including things that we humans leave laying around. They readily take advantage of improperly stored, garbage and pet food. They love pet food, especially cat food. They're highly adaptable because they are generalist and opportunistic. They can adapt to different conditions much faster than other species can. And although they're classified as carnivores on the taxonomic tree because of their teeth, raccoons are actually omnivores, which means they can eat a variety of different types of foods. They really like things that are found in the water, like crayfish or crabs, frogs, and fish. But they also eat vegetables, fruits, nuts, insects, and other small animals. Something I found really interesting and kind of found by accident when I was looking up raccoon things was some things came up about raccoon legends and myths. And what I thought was really cool is that the raccoon is one of several North American animals whose names actually originated with our Native Americans. Raccoon is seen as a trickster spirit in many North American tribes, particularly in children's stories. And then in some legends, raccoons are portrayed as purely mischief makers, while legends from other tribes focus on raccoons using its cleverness and dexterity to escape from danger and acquire food. So even in legends and Native American myths and stories, they're looked at very many, different ways, just like they're kind of looked at by people outside of the tribal communities. And raccoons are also used as clan animals in some Native American cultures, which I thought was really cool. the Muskogee Creek, Chippewa, the Chickasaw, the Shawnee, and the Menominee tribes use them as their clan animals. And some Eastern tribes like the Shawnee also have raccoon dances among their normal tribal dances. So it was kind of interesting to see the different ways that raccoons are cherished in different cultures outside of our own. So I want to talk about some misconceptions that people have about raccoons. One of them is that they wash their food. So you'll often see raccoons rolling their prey around in the water or other items around in the water. But contrary to popular belief, raccoons do not wash their food before eating. And this guy's actually in a mud puddle, so he's definitely not washing anything. But biologists have recently described the behavior more as a feeling rather than a washing. And researchers have found that raccoons' forepaws, so their front feet, are even more sensitive when they're wet. So remember when I talked about earlier, they use their hands or their front paws as another set of eyes. So moistening their paws actually helps them better identify objects that are in their hand as being food or not, which I thought that's kind of an interesting thing that they just discovered not that long ago. Another really big misconception is that raccoons only come out at night. And then if you see one during the day, then it must be sick or have rabies. So it is true that raccoons are mostly nocturnal, are active mainly at night or the kind of dusk and dawn times, but it's totally okay to see raccoons out during the day. Sometimes that's when mom's moving her kits around. They're just kind of passing through your yard, or they might be out looking for food, or they're just dispersing youngsters that are trying to, find their own habitat and home range. Another thing that is, which I saw this as well, talk about rabies. There's a misconception that all raccoons carry rabies. So although raccoons are a reservoir for rabies, which means that they can carry the disease, not all raccoons have it. And actually in Washington, raccoons are not considered a rabies vector. And what a vector is a species that can transmit the disease. So it's not something that we really have to worry about in Washington. You can see from this map, unless you're on the East Coast, that's where raccoons are the predominant, and bats. Of course, bats are rabies vectors all over the country. But on the East Coast, raccoons are a rabies vector. But up in Washington, our only rabies vector in our state is bats. So unless a bat comes into contact with a raccoon, and of course a bat could bite a raccoon and then give the raccoon rabies, but they don't typically come in contact. All of our bats are insectivores. So that shouldn't be an issue. We've tested some raccoons in the state and we still have not found it yet. So that's not an issue that we have to worry about in Washington. So if a raccoon does bite your dog or something, rabies is not something you have to worry about. They do, however, carry other pathogens that can be transferred to humans and your family pet. So it's always good to give them space and not come into contact with them. The main two we worry about are canine distemper, which can affect your dog. So make sure your dog is vaccinated for distemper. And then also Balis astris, which is raccoon roundworm, is found in their feces. So that can be transmitted to people. It's not typically very common to be transmitted to people, but it is something that it can be transmitted to us and also other animals. And then speaking of pets, there's also a misconception that raccoons make good pets. There's all kinds of videos on TikTok and everywhere online on social media with people with their pet raccoons. And although it may be legal in some states for raccoons to be kept as pets, it is not legal in the state of Washington for any member of the public to have a pet. Raccoons do not make good pets. It's illegal at the federal level for anybody in Washington also to have raccoons as pets under the rabies law. Even though they're not a rabies vector here, they are a rabies carrier. It's also, raccoons cannot be imported into the state of Washington as a pet. Typically, the only people who have raccoons in Washington have a education permit for that raccoon, which they would have to get from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Unless they're a captive facility that takes in wayward pets that people had and were confiscated, then they have to work with the Washington Department of Agriculture. Lots of rules and regulations and permitting around having raccoons. Another thing you'll find online, if you really do a little bit of digging or just search for it, another reason why they don't make a good pet is because of these teeth. They have very sharp, pointy teeth. And as they get older and become sexually mature, they can become more aggressive. So they might be cute and cuddly when they're little teeny babies, but when they become sexually mature, they're more attuned to bite and attack people. So there are lots of pictures online of people that got attacked by someone else's raccoon or their own pet. Typically, The ending for those animals is not great. They get euthanized. Sometimes they go to a sanctuary, but typically they'll get euthanized. So it's just best to leave them in nature and let them be where they naturally are supposed to be. As far as their habitat, so raccoons prefer forest areas near a stream or water source, but have adapted to various environments throughout Washington. Raccoon populations can get quite large in urban areas. This has a lot to do with restrictions on hunting and trapping in urban areas. They don't have a lot of predators in urban areas because we've also pushed predators out, and all the human supplied food. So this map shows core habitat for raccoons in our state. The green is where the core habitat is there, and there's some yellow spots in there you can kind of see, which is other habitat that can also utilize. But then if you look at this map, and then you look at the human population map, you might start to see there's a little bit of overlap there. So when you see them side by side, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap between the habitats that the raccoons live in and the habitats that we also live in. So this is why we can come into a little bit of conflict with our neighbors. Like, they're at risk for living in an area where people are, and then there's a conflict situation there with us sometimes. So the combination of raccoons being naturally curious, opportunistic, and generalists, they've learned to exploit resources like garbage and cat food. Like I said, they love cat food that people leave outside, which just can cause us to come in that conflict with our wild neighbors. So there's a few things we recommend, and I'll get to our website next, but so there's a few things that you can do. The best effective way to prevent conflicts is to modify the habitat around your home so as not to attract raccoons. So the best thing to do is don't feed raccoons. Don't give raccoons access to your garbage. Keep pets and pet food indoors, especially cats and cat food. I would recommend keeping cats inside anyway. It's just safer for birds. It's safer for your cat. Definitely keep those things indoors, especially at night when raccoons are more active. Prevent raccoons from entering pet doors. There's also videos on YouTube or on TikTok and things of raccoons coming through people's pet doors, which they will do. Make sure your compost containers are secure and your barbecue areas are cleaned up after you use them. You want to eliminate access to den sites. Like if there's access to your chimney, raccoons like to den up in chimneys. If you have access into your attic from the outside, just make sure those things are kind of tightened up. If you've got poultry, chickens, ducks, turkeys, make sure you keep them really secure outside. Put fences up around your vegetable gardens, or fruit trees, bird feeders, nest boxes. So you might be asking, well, how do I do all this? We actually have a website. Living with Raccoons is one of our websites. And when you go here, you'll see, hopefully you can see this. You'll see that there's lots of different tips on here for each of the things I just kind of brought up on how to kind of keep them, what to do around your own habitat to dissuade them from getting into your attics and into your gardens and things like that. So because so many raccoons live in urban areas, they're subject to being impacted by us, and that can sometimes make them sick or injured in need of medical care. Luckily for them, we have wildlife rehabilitators who are permitted to care for sick and injured wildlife in our state. And I want to stress that they have to be permitted. We do have a lot of regulations and laws surrounding captive wildlife, injured wildlife that are in captivity, rehabilitating wildlife. You have to have a permit, and that's what my job is. You get that through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. There's lots of steps and requirements that people have to get those permits. 1,000 hours of working with a rehabilitator. You have to work with a veterinarian. You have to pass an exam. You have to have inspected a facility. And then if you want to work with specialized species like raptors, deer, and oiled wildlife, and large carnivores, you have to have a special endorsement for that, which is even more requirement. So it's quite an arduous task. And if someone's interested in that who's on the call, I'm happy to talk to them. But it is a permitted wildlife profession. So what I want to talk about is a little bit what rehabilitation is, who our rehabilitators are, and what they do and do not do. And then I'll jump into how raccoons end up in rehab and then kind of what happens while they're there. So rehabilitation is the treatment and temporary care of injured, diseased, and displaced wild animals with the purpose to release physically and psychologically healthy wildlife back to the wild or relieve suffering through euthanasia. So it stresses physically and psychologically, because not only do I want to make sure our wildlife can survive again on their own, so they're physically capable of that, but also psychologically, like do they have all the learned natural behaviors that they need to have to survive and be a productive member of their population. And unfortunately, a reality of wildlife rehabilitation is humane euthanasia. We don't want wildlife to be suffering. A lot of animals that come in are very banged up, they're broken, they're very sick, and there's just sometimes we just cannot save them. A lot of animals we can't save, right? So the best thing we can do is give them the gift of euthanasia to end their suffering. And this is done in a humane way and meets all the vet guidelines and all that types of thing. So it is something that rehabilitators do a lot, but something to keep in mind if you bring an animal to a rehabilitation center, that if they're the ones that determine if that animal is rehabable or not, and what's best for that animal. If they're going to be suffering through the whole process and they may not make it in the end, it's better to maybe just euthanize them right away instead of making them suffer any longer. Our rehabilitators are dedicated people, very passionate. They are wildlife professionals, like I said, and they are committed to providing the highest quality of care to wildlife patients. And I am here to make sure that they do that within our regulations and standards. Wildlife rehabilitation is very important as it contributes in many ways to wildlife management. So we use rehabilitation to measure and reduce human impacts. It contributes to wildlife conservation, especially when we're working with threatened, endangered, and sensitive species, which we do work with. It helps us better understand trends in wildlife behavior and ecology based on when species are coming in and if that changes or shifts at all. And it also helps us monitor wildlife health. We've been doing a lot of that during SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Right now we have an avian influenza outbreak we've been talking about across the country. So we've been surveilling that disease and many other things. This bat here was the first positive case of white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that grows on our bats. It typically was more to the east, but now we've got it in the state. We were able to find the first case in rehab because that animal came in. So it helped us kind of start surveilling and getting ahead of it as much as we could before it really took off here. So rehabilitators, there's certain circumstances where it's appropriate for them to help with sick or injured animals. So if the animal is physically bleeding or vomiting, shivering, lethargic, has been attacked by a dog or a cat, hit by a car, hit a window, things like that. If the animal is caught by a cat, we always recommend it being taken to a wildlife rehabilitator, even if the animal doesn't seem to have any visible wounds. Cats do have bacteria in their saliva, which can be fatal to birds. They really need to get on a round of antibiotics to make sure that the animal does survive post-attack. And then if the animal's truly orphaned, we have a lot of kidnapping cases, which I'll talk about, but we typically want babies to stick with mom so they can learn everything they can from mom. Our rehabbers do a good job, but we're definitely not mom. So if the animal is truly orphaned, it's okay to bring it in. We try to reunite babies with their moms if we can. So that's another case where it's appropriate for our rehabilitators to help. So what they do is provide professional medical care along with their veterinarian. They relieve suffering, like I mentioned. They help ensure survival in the wild, and they do that by offering different enrichments, which I'll show you in a little bit. And that helps us determine whether they're able to express their natural behavior or not. It also keeps their stress levels down and allows them to be in a more natural state. They educate the public about wildlife. They do get a lot of phone calls every year. I think last year, one center got like 20,000 phone calls, which is a lot. That's only one center. And by doing this, they connect the public with our wild neighbors. Things that they don't do, there's some misconceptions. They have to prioritize what they can use their limited resources and staff for. So you want to use that for animal care. So that doesn't leave a lot extra to help pick up wildlife from the public or rescue wildlife, respond to conflict on the ground. They can help over the phone typically, but they can't usually come out and help. And they don't handle rabies exposure. So if there's a bat in your home and you want it tested for rabies, that's the Department of Health. Sometimes like Paul's Wildlife Center can help euthanize a bat, package it up, and you can take it to Department of Health to be tested, but that's something the Department of Health actually determines, not the Department of Fish and Wildlife or our rehabbers. So in Washington, we have 55 rehabilitators. Actually, we have 56. I just permitted somebody else today. 36 facilities now. They come in all shapes and sizes, ranging from our smaller home-based facilities to larger facilities. They take in thousands of patients a year. The majority of them, of course, are small. And they care from everything from hummingbirds to bears, but not all facilities are permitted for the same species. So if you do have an injured animal that you want to take in for help, it's always best to call the facility ahead of time to make sure that's the appropriate facility. And if it's not, they can typically tell you which one you should go to or help you get the animal transported there through their network if that's something that's possible. This is where everybody is located. You know, most of them are in that Bellingham to Olympia corridor, which is where the majority of the people are. So that kind of makes sense, but we definitely have some deficits along the Oregon border and in the center of the state, which we're trying to work on. But this is where everybody's located. And there's different rules around animals going across the state, leaving regions and things, depending upon what the animal is. So just always call a rehabilitator if you need assistance. And if you need to find a rehabilitator, we have this on our website as well. If you just Google WFW, find a rehabilitator, this will pop up. And then you can put your county in and it'll tell you which ones are close by and what they do take. We're going to have an interactive map is being developed right now, which is a bit easier to use. So if you need that, you can check it out on our website. So as far as raccoons in rehab, every year, you know, rehabilitators take in almost 20,000 animals across the state of different species. So I looked up some data for 2021. And just 3 of our facilities, we only have about 5 or 6 that actually take raccoons, that specialized care for them and requirements. But in 2021, from 3 facilities, we had 248 raccoons admitted for care. And of those, 172 of them, we know the reason why they were brought in. Sometimes we just don't know what happened to them and they're just sick or injured. And we're like, we don't know what happened. So for this purpose, we're gonna just focus on the ones we do know. And orphaned and kidnapped kits are definitely the #1 reason why we have raccoons come into rehab. Out of those 172 of raccoons in 2021, 109 of them were actually orphaned or kidnapped. You know, they become orphaned when mom can be hit by a car or trapped and killed, or sometimes raccoons are shot. So and also some are kidnapped from their nest or just found alone, too young to survive on their own, or a mom is removed from a chimney and then they find babies later. So who knows, all kinds of different reasons why they end up there, but they typically are in care all summer and then released in the fall with their adopted brothers or sisters. As far as adult raccoons, we had 63 of that number were adults who were injured in various ways. I tried to find some not so gruesome photos, but sometimes we have raccoons come in that are just full of bullets, like the one on the right, the picture there. She just had bullets throughout her whole body and she was also pregnant. And then sometimes they come in with broken bones because they were hit by a car. I think the bottom photo is one that was, I think, maybe hit by a car. Sometimes people hit them with baseball bats. And that's just the reality sometimes. And then sometimes they come in with garbage or other items stuck on their bodies, like traps. And that can cause injury and permanent damage sometimes. So the raccoon in the top middle is one of those 6-pack plastic things, got stuck around its neck and was digging into its tissues. And then the one on the left, he looks like he got a little greedy and his foot got stuck in. I'm going to guess it's probably a cat food can, but I'm not sure. But those things can cause some serious injury too if they're on for a long period of time. And unfortunately, sometimes in these types of cases, the animals are too broken or beaten up or sick to survive. So then sometimes they're, euthanized. But our rehabilitators are really great and have a lot of success raising healthy kits. And since they're so curious, they make some really fun videos. So to keep these little guys entertained and active and learning natural behaviors that they would learn with mom, rehabilitators provide enrichment. So I just wanted to share some videos from some of our facilities. This is from Sarvi around Halloween time. They like pumpkins a lot, so they'll hide food and things in pumpkins for them to play with and find, and which can be pretty fun. I know like the zoo does stuff like this too, where they give pumpkins to the zoo animals, which is kind of cool. And they eat the pumpkin too, which is helpful. And then we have also these guys. Oh, it's really hot in the summertime. They will put sprinklers out for them to play in, which is kind of fun to watch. They're so curious, so everything's like a new experience. I don't know if you could hear them, but they get pretty excited. And then another form of enrichment is to actually, we want to make sure with raccoons, because they're so easily can be easily habituated, that they're with conspecifics or members of their same species. So we want to make sure that they're always with another raccoon, so they learn, what they are, and they learn from each other as much as they learn from their parents. So these are two little guys checking each other out in their little bank cage. So do a lot of playing and kind of running around and chasing each other and testing, pushing buttons, and just like little kids do, really. And sometimes they give them little stuffed animals to cuddle with, and so they have some tactile things that they can play with and keep warm and things like that. Yeah, and then so ultimately the goal of rehabilitation is to release healthy animals back to the wild, like I mentioned. A video from Paws. I was a naturalist at Paws for a few years, and I did a raccoon release. This is probably from I don't even know, 7 years ago, so a while ago. This kind of gives you an idea of what a raccoon release is like. They're pretty fun because they're touching a lot of these things for the first time. So they're touching leaves and pulling on grass and flipping the carriers over and climbing trees and hanging upside down and playing with GoPros. The best one was that one of them came out and immediately went over to the blackberry bushes and grabbed a blackberry bush, and then he was just like shaking his paw a lot because it obviously hurt, but he never had blackberry bushes before, so he didn't know what it was. We try to release them by water, either a creek or a lake or a pond or something, so they have that. They like aquatic things to eat too much. And we release them far away from houses in urban areas. We take them to parks. With King County parks, a lot of times we release them on King County parks, but get them away from people. And sometimes they're a little scared, like the guy on the left. He's like, I don't know, I'm not really ready to go yet. So we typically let them, they dictate when they leave their carriers, and we just sit there until they all go, and it can be pitch black before we leave, but we want to make sure they're comfortable with their surroundings, because there could be predators out there and they're in a new place. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to answer some questions.
Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat
cool.
for you, and you guys can all feel free to add more questions.
Oh no, there's music playing.
Sorry.
Hold on, I don't know what's happening. Sorry, I heard music playing. Like, what is that?
No problem. So Chris Fuentes asked how our raccoon populations look here in King County, and if it's considered healthy or declining. Do you know?
I mean, I don't know, but I mean, based on how many we see in rehab and how often people see them, I'm sure it's a healthy population if I had to guess. Yeah. Yeah, I would say healthy.
Absolutely. And for those of you that were at our talk last month with the Urban Carnivore Project, they said the same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then do mother raccoons look for specific habitat when they're about to give birth or raise their young?
I mean, they look for places that are protected from the elements and would be protected from predators. So naturally, they would be in a hollowed out tree or a log or something like that. And that's why they like attics and chimneys, because they're protected from the elements and it's like a warm place to be. So that's what they typically would look for, just a nice dry place that's protected for their babies.
Excellent, thank you. Someone else said their friend had a raccoon in their attic that was having babies in the attic, and she was told that she shouldn't stay in her home and not to have her dog in her home. A wildlife specialist, and I don't know where from, came out and took the baby, or wrapped the babies in a blanket and said the mom would come back for them, but the mother didn't. So their questions were, do you know why she couldn't stay in her house? And do you know why the mom didn't come back for her babies?
I'm not sure why you wouldn't be able to stay in your house. I think that may have been wrong information. There should be no danger there, right? The thing we worry about would be distemper and Bayless astris, and if it's in the attic, it shouldn't come into your house. So I think that, I don't know, they don't have rabies here, so that wouldn't be a worry. Sometimes moms, if it's too much of a disturbance and if their babies are really young, they'll just leave because they can have more, because they look at us as predators, right? They think that we're a predator and we're going to come and take and eat their babies. So they can have more babies. It sounds harsh, but they can have more babies. So sometimes they'll just leave and don't want to risk their own health or risk their own life for that. If they're older and they put more, if the babies are older and they've put more time into them, they might be more likely to come back. But if it's a huge disturbance, sometimes they just don't, unfortunately. But we've tried to reunite babies before and have moms come back. Sometimes they will. Sometimes it's individualized depending upon the mom. If she's a new mom, it's her first litter, she might be like, I'm out, and she'll just leave. This is her third litter. She's like, oh yeah, this has happened before. I'm just going to move my baby. So there's so many different components to that. That's unfortunate that happened. I don't know what happened to the babies after that, but that's how too some babies end up in rehabilitation, because the den's been disturbed, or wildlife control officer came out and took the mom, or swished, scared the mom away, and then she just, takes off.
Yeah. And then just a general rehabilitation question. Kirsty has been seeing a more than average number of squirrels who are presenting with neurological symptoms, like a slow decline, and is just wondering if they're, inhaling roundworm from community latrines, or if there's something else. Have you guys seen any patterns in that recently?
I haven't heard anything from the rehabilitators about that specific issue. So I don't have a good answer for you, but it'll be interesting to see the data. Rehabilitators are required to submit a report every year and a daily ledger, which is like basically an account of every single animal that comes in, and we can see why they came in. So that'll be something I can check in with them about. They're pretty good about letting us know if something odd is happening. Like right now, varied thrushes are coming in a lot. We don't know why, but I wonder what area that's in. I don't think it would be from raccoon. I don't think it would be from latrines though. Gotcha. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay. Those are all the questions we have in the chat so far. If anybody wants to drop any last questions in, we have a little time. Kirsty, who asked about the squirrels, says it's usually starting with their tail getting thin and wobbly. Yeah. So
hi, Kirsty.
Gotcha. All right. Well, in that case, thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate you being here and talking with us about raccoons. They're one of our most common urban species, and it's great to kind of learn more about them. And did have a question about how long they live.
Oh yeah, I had that on my slide until I just totally spaced over it. They don't live very long, 2 to 3 years. So they just, I think maybe because they're in such urban areas, right? So it's risky to live around people. So that's probably why. I don't know if they're in a more natural setting, which is probably hard to find right now, more natural setting with raccoons. They might live a little bit longer. In captivity, they can live longer than that, but 2 to 3 years, so not long.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I didn't realize that really when I thought maybe that was the case. Like I thought maybe 5, and then I read that. I was like, well, that's sad. It was such a short life. Yeah.
Okay. And then is raccoon urine toxic to pets?
Not that I know of, no. Again, it's the fecal matter, which is where the Bayless is. So you can, I think Leah put some, CDC has a good PDF of how to clean that up and have with what safety equipment to wear and how to do that safely. And Humane Society also has a couple of resources if you have a latrine site in your yard. And latrine site is just where raccoons will frequently use the bathroom, just like cats do with litter boxes, or mountain lions even have a latrine. A lot of animals do that, just keep their fecal matter in one place because they want to keep everything else clean, right? So there are some good resources online to help if you've got that and you want to get that cleaned up safely.
Gotcha. And then do you know how far generally raccoons travel?
I don't know how far they travel. Probably not very far, depending upon where they are, but I don't know what their home range is. Probably. It also probably depends if they're in an urban area versus a bigger green space, like a green belt. They'll probably travel a lot farther, but if they're in like little urban park, they probably stay much closer to that centralized location, especially females if they're trying to find good denning sites. That would be my guess.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate you coming and joining us. Once again, thanks to Green Tukwila Partnership for sponsoring and co-hosting these talks with us. They've been really fun. Definitely check out next month. So we're going to talk about the great blue herons, which are very common even in urban areas and around the waterways, especially in Tukwila. And then if you're interested, the Habitat at Home program is all about creating wildlife habitat right where you live, work, and play, ways to coexist with our wildlife species. So the Living with Wildlife pages that Jen mentioned are a great resource. Our website's a great resource if you just kind of want to get started on how do you bring more wildlife into your area, live alongside them, support them in these urban areas where it's so limited. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight. And yeah, I think we're going to call it a night. All right. Thanks again.